The Forgotten Tunnel. My name is Jack, and I'll be the first to admit that we should have listened to the locals. They'd warned us about the tunnel, warned us with somber faces and serious tones, the way adults talk about things they half believe themselves. But Natalie and I were stubborn, thrill-seekers since high school, always chasing the next adrenaline rush. So, when we heard about the Forgotten Tunnel, on the outskirts of our small Pennsylvania town, we couldn't resist. It's probably just some old drainage system, Natalie had said, adjusting her backpack as we hiked through the overgrown woods. You know how people love to make up ghost stories. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. The rumors were unsettling. People claimed that anyone who went in never came out, and those who had ventured close reported hearing whispers, the scrape of something dragging against stone. We'd laughed it off at first, but as we approached the tunnel's entrance, I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. The opening loomed before us, a gaping maw of darkness framed by crumbling brick. Moss and vines crept along the edges, and the air around it was unnaturally cool. Natalie pulled out her flashlight and grinned at me, though there was a nervous edge to her smile. "You ready, Jack?" "Always," I replied, though my voice sounded hollow. We stepped inside. The tunnel swallowed us whole. At first, it was just like any other abandoned place we'd explored, damp, musty, littered with graffiti. The beam of Natalie's flashlight revealed cryptic drawings on the walls, spirals, stick figures with unnaturally long limbs, symbols I didn't recognize. Some of them were smeared, as if someone had tried to erase them. Others looked freshly drawn, the chalk lines crisp and bright against the stone. "This is kind of creepy," Natalie admitted, her voice echoing faintly. "A little," I said, though my heart was pounding harder than I wanted to admit. We ventured deeper. The light from the entrance faded until it was just us and the narrow beam of the flashlight. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with each step. And that's when we heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, just a soft scuffing sound behind us. I froze, grabbing Natalie's arm. "Did you hear that?" She nodded, her face pale. We both turned, shining the flashlight back the way we'd come. The tunnel was empty, the wall stretching into shadow. "Probably just the echo," she said, though her voice wavered. We kept walking, but the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, until it sounded like someone was just a few paces behind us. I spun around, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, but there was nothing there. "Jack," Natalie whispered, "I don't like this." "Me neither," I admitted. "Let's turn back." We retraced our steps, or at least we thought we did. But the tunnel didn't lead us back to the entrance. Instead, it twisted and branched in ways it hadn't before, splitting into narrow passages that seemed to shift when we weren't looking. "This isn't right," Natalie said, panic creeping into her voice. "We didn't come this way." "Maybe we took a wrong turn," I said, though I knew that wasn't true. There hadn't been any turns. The footsteps were still there, always behind us. Sometimes they stopped for a moment, and we'd hold our breath, straining to listen. Then they'd start again, closer than before. And then there were the whispers. Low and indistinct, like a dozen voices murmuring just out of earshot. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable: anger, malice, hunger. Natalie's flashlight flickered, and she cursed, shaking it. "Don't do that," I said, my voice tight. "I'm not doing it on purpose," she snapped. "The batteries are." The light went out. Darkness pressed in on us like a living thing. I reached for Natalie's hand, gripping it tightly. "Don't let go," I said. "I won't." We fumbled in the pitch black, moving blindly. My phone was in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen stayed dark. No signal, no light. Natalie's was the same. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us. The footsteps quickened, as if whoever was behind us was running now. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. There. Natalie's voice was tight with relief. I see something ahead. A faint glow appeared in the distance, pale and flickering like candlelight. We stumbled toward it, desperate for any reprieve from the darkness. As we got closer, the glow resolved into a circle of faintly glowing symbols etched into the floor. At the center of the circle lay a pile of bones. Human bones. Natalie stopped short, her hand tightening around mine. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the whispers stopped. The footsteps ceased. The silence was worse. Then the air around us shifted. The darkness felt alive, rippling like water. Something moved within it, something vast and unseen. My heart thundered in my chest as a deep, guttural voice echoed through the tunnel. "You should not have come." I wish I could say we ran, but we didn't. We couldn't. My legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. Natalie clung to me, trembling, as the voice surrounded us, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You have disturbed the quiet," it said. "You cannot leave." The circle of symbols began to glow brighter, the light pulsing in time with the voice. The pile of bones shifted, rattling as if moved by unseen hands. And then they began to rise. Piece by piece, the bones assembled themselves into a grotesque figure, its proportions all wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs ending in jagged points. The skull tilted toward us, empty sockets burning with cold, blue fire. "Run," I whispered, though I wasn't sure my legs would obey. But Natalie didn't move. Her eyes were wide, locked on the creature. The thing stepped toward us, its bony feet clicking against the stone floor. Behind it, the shadows writhed, shapes moving within them. More figures, more things. Finally, Natalie snapped out of her trance. She grabbed my arm, and we bolted, running blindly into the darkness. The whispers returned, louder now, angry. The footsteps followed, not just one set but many, echoing all around us. No matter how far we ran, the tunnel stretched on, endless. Every turn brought us back to the same place, the circle of bones, the glowing symbols, the impossible figure waiting for us. "We're trapped," Natalie gasped, doubling over to catch her breath. "There's no way out." "There has to be," I said, though I didn't believe it. The creature took another step forward, its jaw opening in a soundless scream. Behind it, the shadows surged, spilling toward us like a living tide. And then, in the distance, I saw something, a faint glimmer of light, different from the symbols. It was warm, golden, and it flickered like firelight. "There." I grabbed Natalie's hand and pointed. "We have to go that way." She didn't hesitate. We ran, the golden light growing brighter as the darkness closed in around us. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, the footsteps pounding like a drumbeat. Just when I thought we wouldn't make it, we burst into the light. It wasn't an exit. It was another chamber, larger than the tunnel, its walls lined with more of the glowing symbols. At the center stood an altar, and on it lay a book, its pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze. The voice returned, softer now, almost amused. "The choice is yours." "What choice?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure who or what I was speaking to. "One stays. One leaves." Natalie and I looked at each other, horror dawning in her eyes. "No," she said, shaking her head. "We both leave." The voice laughed, a sound like grinding stone. One stays. One leaves. The shadows crept closer, the figures emerging from them. There was no time to argue. I turned to Natalie, my chest tight. I'll do it. You go. No, she grabbed my arm. We'll find another way. There has to be. The shadows surged forward, and I made my decision. With one final look at Natalie, I stepped toward the altar. The moment I touched the altar, the air around me shifted again, growing colder, heavier. The book opened on its own, its pages flipping rapidly before settling on one. Symbols glowed faintly on the parchment, pulsing like a heartbeat. I couldn't read the text, but the meaning was clear in my mind, an agreement, a binding contract. Your choice is made, the voice said, resonating through the chamber. She will leave. You will stay. Wait. Natalie's voice cracked as she lunged toward me, but an invisible barrier stopped her. She pounded against it, tears streaming down her face. No. Jack, don't do this. It's the only way, I said, though the words tasted like ash. You have to go. The glowing symbols on the walls flared, and the chamber filled with a blinding light. I felt a force pull Natalie away from me, dragging her toward the tunnel's exit. Her screams echoed, fading into the distance until there was only silence. The light dimmed, and I was alone. Or so I thought. The figures in the shadows stepped closer, their forms becoming more distinct. They weren't human, not anymore. Twisted and grotesque, their faces were masks of agony, their limbs elongated and broken. One of them reached for me, its clawed hand brushing my shoulder. Pain lanced through me, and I fell to my knees. Your place is here now, the voice said. You are one of us. I screamed as the darkness consumed me. I awoke in silence, though I wasn't sure if I'd been asleep or simply unconscious. The chamber was gone, replaced by a vast, empty void. Shadows drifted like smoke, and faint whispers curled around me, too quiet to understand. My body felt different, heavier yet hollow, as though something had been taken and replaced with nothing. When I tried to stand, my limbs moved sluggishly, resisting my will. My hands weren't my hands anymore. They were longer, clawed, the skin pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. Panic surged through me, but it was muted, distant, as if my emotions were no longer entirely my own. You are reborn, the voice said, echoing through the void. A guardian of the quiet. No, I whispered, though the sound was barely human. My voice was dry and rasping, like wind over dead leaves. This isn't. I didn't agree to this. You made the choice, the voice replied, unyielding. One stays. One leaves. You are bound. I staggered forward, though there was no ground beneath me, only an endless abyss. My thoughts felt fragmented, pieces of myself slipping away like sand through my fingers. I tried to hold on to memories, Natalie's face, her laugh, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, but they faded, replaced by something cold and foreign. The shadows moved closer, coalescing into shapes. They were like me now, or perhaps I was like them. Hollow eyes, twisted limbs, faces that were more suggestion than form. They watched me silently, waiting. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice cracking with desperation. To serve, the voice said. To guard. To ensure the quiet remains undisturbed. The meaning sank in slowly, like a stone dropping into dark water. I was no longer Jack. I was something else, a part of the tunnel, its endless maze, its shifting darkness. I was the footsteps, the whispers, the thing lurking just out of sight. But deep within me, a fragment of my old self resisted. If I was part of the tunnel now, then maybe I could control it. Maybe I could find a way to break the cycle. "I'll fight you," I said, though the words felt futile. The voice laughed, low and rumbling. "Many have tried. Time lost all meaning in the void. Days, years, centuries, I couldn't tell. The tunnel became my world, its twisting passages and suffocating darkness as familiar as my own thoughts. I watched as others stumbled in, drawn by curiosity or desperation. I tried to warn them, to guide them away, but the tunnel had its own will. It wanted them, needed them, and I was powerless to stop it. And then one day, I saw her. Natalie. She was older now, her face lined with worry, her hair streaked with gray. But it was her, unmistakably. She stood at the tunnel's entrance, a flashlight in hand, her eyes searching the darkness. "For me." "Jack?" she called, her voice trembling. "Are you here?" Something inside me stirred, a spark of hope and despair intertwined. I moved toward her, my clawed feet silent against the stone. The shadows parted, revealing her to me fully for the first time in years. Her eyes widened as she saw me, and I saw the horror dawn on her face. She didn't scream, but the way she stepped back, clutching the flashlight like a shield, told me everything. "Natalie," I rasped, my voice barely recognizable. "It's me." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No. No, it can't be." "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I tried to save you. I'm still trying." Her expression softened, the fear giving way to something else. "Jack." Before she could say more, the tunnel shifted around us, the walls groaning as they closed. The familiar whispers swirled again, louder now, furious. The tunnel did not welcome her return, and it certainly did not welcome our reunion. Shadows rippled like storm-tossed waves, and the unseen force of the tunnels will pressed against us both. I could feel it pulling at me, trying to remind me of my place, trying to drag her away. I reached out with my twisted hands, desperate to bridge the gap between us. "You shouldn't have come back," I choked out, my voice a hollow echo. "It's too dangerous." Natalie stepped closer, ignoring the malice swirling around us. She was trembling, but her eyes held a resolve I hadn't seen in years. "I couldn't just leave you here," she said. "I've been searching all this time." Her words hit me like a hammer. Searching? After everything, she had been trying to find me? My chest, if it could still be called that, ached with something long buried, hope. The tunnel didn't care for hope. Its voice returned, seething with rage. "She cannot take you. You belong to the quiet." "No!" Natalie shouted, defiance blazing in her voice. "He's not yours." The light from her flashlight began to flicker, the beam cutting through the shadows like a knife. Wherever it landed, the darkness recoiled, and I felt the tunnel's grip on me loosen, just slightly. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, pulsing in anger. "Leave now, or you will stay forever," the voice boomed, shaking the ground beneath us. Natalie turned to me, desperation written across her face. "Jack, listen to me. There has to be a way out of this. I found this place, I can help you." I wanted to believe her, but the tunnel's power was ancient, unyielding. It had bound me for so long, and I wasn't sure I could break free. Still, seeing her there, so determined, sparked something in me that the tunnel hadn't completely destroyed. "Then we need to fight it together," I said, stepping closer to her. The shadows clawed at me, but I pushed through them, ignoring the searing pain. Natalie raised the flashlight higher, the beam steady now, and aimed it at the glowing symbols on the walls. These symbols, there has to be a way to break them. Maybe they're what's keeping this thing alive. The tunnel roared in protest, the symbols flaring like fire. The whispers rose into a deafening cacophony, and the shadows surged toward us, their shapes twisting into grotesque forms. "Natalie!" I shouted, reaching for her. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Keep them off me." As Natalie focused on the symbols, I turned to face the advancing shadows. For the first time since becoming part of the tunnel, I fought back. My clawed hands swiped at the figures, and to my surprise, they recoiled, retreating with unnatural shrieks. My own connection to the tunnel gave me some control over it, a power I had never dared to test before. Natalie ran her fingers over the symbols, tracing their patterns. "These are rituals," she muttered, half to herself. "Bindings, sacrifices. If I can disrupt them." "Hurry!" I growled, lashing out at another shadow. The tunnel screamed, a sound like stone grinding against stone, as Natalie began to erase one of the glowing symbols with her bare hand. It burned her skin, but she didn't stop. The light flickered, then dimmed, and I felt the tunnel's hold on me weaken further. "You cannot undo this," the voice roared, shaking the very walls. "The quiet is eternal." Natalie ignored it, moving to the next symbol. Her determination was unwavering, even as the tunnel fought back. The ground cracked beneath us, and the air grew heavy with the stench of decay. Shadows swarmed, more than I could hold back, and they began to surround her. "Natalie!" I shouted, rushing toward her. But before I could reach her, the final symbol flared with blinding light. Natalie screamed as the light engulfed her, and the tunnel's voice let out a deafening roar. The ground trembled violently, and for a moment, I thought everything would collapse. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold, damp ground. The tunnel was gone, replaced by a wide, open field bathed in soft moonlight. The air was fresh, free of the oppressive weight that had hung over me for so long. I sat up, looking around in confusion. My hands were normal again, no claws, no twisted flesh. My body felt whole, human. But Natalie was nowhere to be seen. "Natalie?" I called, my voice hoarse. There was no response. Panic gripped me as I stumbled to my feet, scanning the field. She had to be here. She had saved me, she wouldn't have just disappeared. Then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, like a flickering candle. I ran toward it, my heart pounding, and found her lying on the grass. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, but she was breathing. "Natalie!" I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking her gently. "Wake up!" She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw me, a weak smile crossed her face. "Jack, you're okay." Tears blurred my vision as I pulled her into a hug. "You saved me. You did it." She nodded, her strength fading. "The symbols, they're gone. The tunnel can't take anyone else." Her words were a relief, but the way her body felt in my arms, too light, too fragile, filled me with dread. "You're going to be okay," I said, more to convince myself than her. "I'll get help." But as I held her, her body began to fade, her form dissolving into faint, golden light. "No!" I cried, clutching at her, but it was no use. The light drifted upward, scattering into the night sky like fireflies. I was alone again. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at the stars. Eventually, I made my way back to town, though I couldn't explain how. The locals didn't believe my story, how could they? But the tunnel was gone, and no one ever spoke of it again. Sometimes, late at night, I hear her voice in my dreams, calling my name. And when I look up at the stars, I think I see her there, watching over me. She gave everything to save me. Now, it's my turn to live a life worthy of her sacrifice. Shadows writhed and thickened, forming a barrier between us. The tunnel was angry, resisting her presence. It didn't want her here. Go! I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally. You have to leave. I came back for you, Natalie said, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm not leaving without you. You don't understand, I said, panic rising in my chest. It's too late for me. The tunnel won't let me go. But she didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, closer to the darkness that surrounded me. The flashlight in her hand flickered, its beam weak against the oppressive shadows. I don't care, she said, her voice firm. I'm not losing you again. The tunnel groaned louder, the walls trembling as if in protest. The other figures in the shadows stirred, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. They were watching, waiting. I could feel their malice, their hunger. They wanted her. No! I roared, turning toward the shapes in the darkness. You can't have her. The figures hesitated, their movements faltering. The tunnel itself seemed to waver, as if confused. I realized then that I still had some power, some connection to this place. I wasn't entirely lost, not yet. Natalie, listen to me, I said, my voice urgent. There's a way out. You have to follow the light. No matter what you hear or see, don't stop. Do you understand? She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm not leaving you. You have to. I said, stepping closer to her. The light from her flashlight burned against my skin, but I ignored the pain. If you stay, the tunnel will take you too. Please, Natalie. You have to go. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression torn. Then she nodded, though I could see the anguish in her eyes. Promise me, she said, her voice breaking. Promise me you'll try to find a way out too. I promise, I said, though I wasn't sure it was a promise I could keep. She turned then, reluctantly, and began to walk toward the faint glimmer of light that had appeared in the distance. The tunnel fought her, the shadows writhing and reaching for her, but I pushed against them with everything I had. I didn't know how long I could hold them back. The figures in the darkness growled, their shapes solidifying as they moved toward her. Desperation surged through me, and I lashed out, my clawed hands tearing through the shadows. I felt a strange satisfaction as they recoiled, their forms dissolving into smoke. Keep going. I shouted. Don't look back. Natalie broke into a run, the light growing brighter as she neared it. The tunnel roared around us, the walls shaking violently. Cracks spiderwebbed through the stone, and debris rained down, but she didn't stop. She disappeared into the light, her form swallowed by its brilliance. And then she was gone. The tunnel was silent again, the oppressive darkness settling over me like a shroud. I sank to my knees, exhaustion washing over me. The other figures retreated into the shadows, their presence fading but not gone. The tunnel still owned me, and I knew it would punish me for what I'd done. But for the first time since I'd made my choice, I felt a flicker of hope. Natalie was safe. She had escaped. And if she could find a way out, maybe, just maybe, I could too. The voice returned, colder and more menacing than before. You defy us. I'll keep defying you, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my chest. I'll find a way out. I'll end this. You are bound, the voice said, its tone final. You belong to the quiet. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Deep down, I knew the truth, the tunnel wasn't invincible. It could be fought. It could be beaten. And as long as I held on to that belief, I wasn't truly lost. I stood, the weight of the tunnel pressing down on me, and began to walk. The darkness closed in, the whispers returning to mock and torment me. But I kept moving, my resolve growing stronger with each step. I didn't know where the path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't done fighting. Not yet.